Okay, Erev Tov everyone. So we're continuing discussing the laws of Kriat Shema as we've been discussing the last few nights. Last night we spoke about the concept of kavanah when it comes to Kriat Shema. We mentioned, I'll just like we said briefly at the end, but there is a double kavanah, in fact a triple kavanah when it comes to Kriat Shema. Right? We mentioned that there is a, in general, kavanah, intent that one has when one fulfills a mitzvah. One has in mind that one is fulfilling the mitzvah. With Kriat Shema, over and above that, we have in mind the idea of Kabbalat Or Malchut Shamayim. The meaning of the first pasuk of Kriat Shema, one has to at least have that generally in mind when one says that. And then there is, when we say the final paragraph, there's a separate mitzvah when we say Kriat Shema, which is the mitzvah of remembering Yetziat Mitzrayim every day and every night. And that is why the final paragraph of Shema, even though it deals primarily with tzitzit, which is a mitzvah which applies during the day, nonetheless we say it at night as well, because of the mitzvah of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So most people know about the kavanah, certainly of Kriat Shema, what it is, but not everybody remembers that we say the last paragraph of a separate mitzvah one has to have in mind of remembering Yetziat Mitzrayim. So one needs to be thinking about that at least nominally as well. Okay. The next section in the Pnei Halacha, he talks about Dinei Amirata, the details of how we say Kriat Shema. So he writes as follows: Yikra Kriat Shema בכוונה גדולה, באימה, ביראה, רטט וזיה, זה all from the Shulchan Aruch, ויחשוב בליבו שהוא קורא עתה את דבר המלך הקדוש ברוך הוא. One needs to read it with awe, with fear, with a certain seriousness, understanding that one is saying the words of the king. ואף שקוראים את שמע בכל יום שחרית וערבית, even though we say Kriat Shema every day, twice a day, nonetheless, יתאמץ להתרכז במשמעות הדברים, כאילו הם חדשים אצלו. One needs to think about the words and try and think about it and say these words every day as if they are brand new, as if this is the first time that we are saying them. בנוסף לכוונה, צריך לקרוא לדקדק באותיותיה. So not only the kavanah, but one has to be as exacting as possible, and as precise in saying the actual words. This is true for all of davening, but particularly for Kriat Shema. שלא יבליע שום אות. We shouldn't swallow any of the words or swallow any of the letters as we're saying them. לא הדגיש את הרפה ולא הרפה את המודגש. Okay, ideally one should say all the words and all the letters appropriately. לכתחילה יש להבחין בין א' לעין ובין כף לח' ובין קמץ לפתח. Okay, between all the different sounds and all the different letters which are pronounced properly. בדיעבד אם קרא שלא בתקתוק יצא. Okay, b'diavad, if one just so long as one said all the words, one has fulfilled the obligation. ובתנאי שלא יחסיר מילה או הבהרה שלמה מתוך מילה. So long as one does not omit any sound or any word. Right? This can happen sometimes. You say Kriat Shema very, very quickly, and you're in a rush to get there as soon as you can. So one needs to be careful not to swallow any words or not to omit any of the syllables. צריך להשמיע לאוזנו את מה שהוא מוציא מפיו. Ideally, one should be able to hear for oneself. The rest of the shul doesn't have to hear, but one should be able to, when one is praying and when is saying the words of Kriat Shema, so there should be a sound that is coming out from your mouth, at least that you can hear it. בדיעבד אם קרא בשפתיו אף שלא השמיע לאוזנו, כיוון שעשה מעשה בשפתיו יצא. In other words, if one mouthed the words and you actually did not make a sound, but that's okay. But so long as you've actually said all the words with your mouth, if you're just reading through and scanning or saying it in your mind, that is not sufficient. Mekar adin, af שראוי לקרוא את שמע לפניו בלשון הקודש. This is a very interesting discussion. What language should one say Kriat Shema in? So what do you mean what language? Obviously it's in Hebrew. You say it in Lashon HaKodesh. The issue is that what if one does not understand? So the truth is, so he brings out the Shulchan Aruch really says, if one understands in a different language, then one could say Shema in whatever language they understand. The problem is, we have to know that if you say it in Hebrew, even if you don't understand every word, you fulfilled the mitzvah. But if you say it in another language, you have to understand everything, and you have to get the right translation. You have to get all the right words. And as we'll see, the poskim discuss, we don't know how to translate all the words. For example, how do you translate the totafot? Right? No one really knows what the phylactery is. Right? I don't know what a phylactery is. Maybe you do. But that's one of the problems. Now, I had a Rebbe once used to say, we're going to, when he was teaching us how to daven, so he said, we're going to say the Shema now. He said, if you don't understand the English, say the Hebrew. That was his But in any event, so he says, ideally, Kriat Shema and all of our tefillah should be in Lashon HaKodesh, in Hebrew. If you read or you daven in a different language, you have still fulfilled the obligation. Bitnai shavin et otah safa. On the condition that you understand what you were saying. אלא שכתבו כמה מגדולי האחרונים, שכיום אי אפשר לצאת ידי קריאת שמע בשפה אחרת. Many of the אחרונים write that nowadays one cannot fulfill the obligation of Shema in a different language, מפני שישנן מילים שאיננו יודעים לתרגם במדויק, because there are certain words that we don't know exactly how to translate them. So he brings here a different example to Totafot. The example he gives are much more simple, but for example, he says the word Vishinantam. What does the word Vishinantam mean? So the meaning is, in Hebrew, there's a double meaning here, which doesn't work in every language. Mashmota b'ivrit היא גם שינון וגם חידוד. The word Vishinantam refers to, and you'll teach them to your children, right? Vishinantam lefanecha. Shinantam relates the word shinun, which is to repeat. When we learn something and we repeat it and we go over and over again, that's why Mishnah, that's where it comes from as well. The renowned Dvarim, which is Mishneh Torah, the repetition, but also chidud, also that there is a sharpening. That when I learn it, I'm not just repeating something I already know, but I'm making it clearer, I'm sharpening the meaning as well. En milah kazot b'safot acherot. How are you going to find such a word in English that contains the essence of both of these? So this is brought in the Achronim, but this is a challenge. הואיל ולא ניתן לתרגם את קריאת שמע באופן מדויק, אין אפשרות לקוראה בשפה זרה. And since we cannot precisely translate it, there's an interesting discussion here in the Achronim, what happened in earlier generations, were they able to translate it, what happened now. But in any event, the general consensus seems to be that we cannot adequately translate it into another language, therefore we should say Kriat Shema in Hebrew. Obviously, it's better to understand what one is saying, better to learn the Hebrew as well, and to understand that. But even if one did not, as we said, so long as you understand the general meaning, understand the first pasuk, that would be okay. So the next section here relates to Ofen Amirata. Mutar lekrot Shema ba'amida, or b'yeshiva, or b'shchiva al tzidor. One is allowed to read Shema while standing, or sitting, or lying on one side. This is actually a machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai in the Mishnah. אמנם לדעת בית שמאי צריך לקרוא שמע בערב בשכיבה ובבוקר בעמידה. Right, the pasuk says, the pasuk we say in Shema, it says בשוכבך ובקומך, when you lie down and when you get up. So Beit Shammai says that at night you say Shema lying down, and in the morning you say the Shema standing up. However, we don't paskin that way. We paskin like Beit Hillel. We say b'shochpacha v'kumecha ultimately refers to not the way, not the posture in which one says Shema, but the time in which one wakes up, the time one goes to sleep. And there's a long discussion in the Gemara exactly what are those times and how do we define it. Okay, he says so that's how we go according to Beit Hillel. אפשר ללמוד מהלכה זו שהאמונה אינה דבר מנותק מהעולם שרק בתנוחה מסוימת אפשר לבטא. It's not that we can only express our emunah and our faith in a certain posture. Right? אלא האמונה מתבטאת בקריאת שמע שייכת לכל מצבי חייו של האדם. It relates to every situation in one's life. ולכן אפשר לקרוא את שמע בכל מצב. And therefore you can say שמע wherever you are. מעיקר הדין אפשר לקרוא את שמע בהליכה. Okay, now here's an exception. According to the letter of the law, you could say Shema even, we said, sitting, standing, even when you're walking, right? Where does this come up? This can come up relatively often, which is if one davens in a place, let's say, Maariv, this isn't usually a problem. Well, actually it could be. Let's say you daven Maariv earlier, and you know that you need to repeat Shema later on, so you're walking home or whatever, and you notice it's dark, so you say, I'm going to say Shema now while I'm walking. Or, if you're davening somewhere where in the morning, let's say sometimes on Shabbat, in certain months, if the time of Kriat Shema gets a little bit earlier, and the place where you daven starts a little bit later, so you're going to come into shul, and by the time that you say Kriat Shema in shul, it's going to be the time's already passed. So then one has to say it beforehand to make sure to fulfill the mitzvah. So maybe you're walking to shul, and you say, I need to say Shema before I get there. So you say, why are you walking? So can you do that? So the pasuk says, Uvelechtecha b'derech. It says, while you're walking on your way, אלא שאמרו חכמים שאין ראוי לאדם לקבל על עצמו או מלכות שמיים כדרך הרי. If the whole essence, what are we doing when we're saying Shema, we're accepting or malchut shamayim, accepting the yoke of heaven. Someone should be sitting or standing in one place. It's not so appropriate to be doing that while one is in the middle of walking. Therefore, לפיכך נכון שהמהלך בדרכו. Somebody's walking, somebody's on a journey and they realize they need to say Kriat Shema. So, יעמוד Ba'ez Kriat HaPasuk HaRishon Shel Shema. We said this right at the beginning. We said the first pasuk, which we need kavanah, we might have to repeat, and it needs a higher level. So one would have to stand in one's place to say the first pasuk, and then afterwards you can carry on. So לאיש לקרוא את שמה בשכיבה או על הגב או על הבטן. Okay. מפני חשיבותו של הפרשה הראשונה, since the entire first paragraph is where we are accepting או מלכות שמיים, צריך אדם להיזהר בשעת קריאתה שלא לעסוק בשום דבר אחר. One needs to be very careful not to be engaged in anything else while one is reading that. ולא ימוז בעיניו או באצבעותיו או בשפתיו. Okay, it's not just that one shouldn't be concentrating on anything else, shouldn't be talking, shouldn't be hinting, shouldn't be pointing with your fingers or anything like that. Okay. And we'll get to maybe the final piece we'll discuss tonight, is that there are the number of words in the Shema. There's a hint there as well, that there are 248 words, ramach, tevot, in Kriat Shema. It writes like this: HaTorah notenet chayim v'refuah le'olam u'le'adam. It's all hinted at that the Torah brings us life and brings us health to a person and to the world. ובמיוחד קריאת שמע שכלולים בה יסודות האמונה וקיום המצוות. Kriat Shema, as we've been discussing, contains the basis, contains the foundation of our faith and fulfilling the mitzvot. ואמרו חכמים שיש בקריאת שמע רמ"ח מילים. So חכמים said there are 248 words in Kriat Shema. Now you're going to challenge me in a moment, but we'll explain. וכן בגוף האדם ישנם רמ"ח איברים. It also says that there are 248 limbs in the human body. Again, how do we count that? And that modern anatomy comes up with different ways of numbering, and that's a topic in and of itself. But there's a concept of 248 איברים, 248 limbs in the body. וכשאדם קורא את קריאת שמע כתיקונה, כל האיבר והאיבר נוטל מילה אחת ומתרפא בה. Okay, so when we read the words of Kriat Shema, that's why we have to be careful not to miss out any words. Each word alludes to a certain limb and brings refuah to that limb of the body. Okay, mystical concept. אלא שבפועל יש בשלוש פרשיות של קריאת שמע רמ"ח מילים. Okay, so all that's very, very nice. You have 248 limbs in the body, you have 248 words in Kriat Shema, it all matches up perfectly. Problem is, like I say, modern medicine will tell you don't have 248 limbs in the body. It will come up with a different number. But more importantly than that is if we look through Kriat Shema, we don't have 248 words either. We have 245 words. וכדי להשלים הרמ"ח, so how do we get to 248? חוזר החזן ואומר השם אלוקיכם אמת. Those last three words that we have at the end of Shema, the Chazan goes and repeats. The Chazan says those three words again. ובזה נשלמו רמ"ח המילים. So from there we learn something very important, that it's not just me saying the Shema by myself, but I'm part of the tzibur, I'm part of the community. I'm dependent on the Chazan to say those extra words. Somebody who's praying by themselves is missing those three words, and therefore we need to make them up. So there are different minhagim, but our minhag is that at the beginning of Kriat Shema there are three words that are printed in small in the siddur, right? Kal melech ne'eman, which if one is praying without a minyan for whatever reason, so one would say those words beforehand, and then you would get to the 248. If you're davening with a minyan, with the Chazan, so you don't have to say them because the Chazan will repeat those words for you at the end. Rabbi Kenigsberg ben Akasha,